the slides for this will be made available after the session as well. So you'll have access to those afterwards. So we're going to be talking about how you search for articles, journal articles, in a systematic way. So most of you will be familiar with having done a literature review, probably at some point in your academic career. And literature review, the purpose of it is to find out what the academic community already know about a topic. You may have done more of a traditional literature review in the past, where you kind of do a bit of searching, you read something, you start writing about it, maybe you spot some interesting things in the references, maybe you learn a new phrase and then you go off and search again and you start adding it back into what you've written. The systematic review is a very structured format. It's a very structured method for doing a literature review. So rather than that kind of following your nose ad hoc searching, you're going to follow some very specific steps. So I think it's really helpful to think about a systematic review as kind of 3 sets of searches. Okay, so your first search is your scoping searches, and you're kind of finding out like what's out there on this topic, what language, what vocabulary do people use when they talk about your area of research. And there may well be things that you're really familiar with calling it, but there may be older language or different terminology that's used in different parts of the world to describe that that area of research. And also at the same time in this scoping searches, you're figuring out which databases are most useful for me to find things on this topic. When you have done that search, those searches, you're going to feel a lot more sort of confident about what's out there. Okay, and then it's time to move on to search number 2, which is where you do your actual systematic search. So your scoping searches will have helped you decide on the language you're using and where you're searching. And then you can run your systematic search, where you export all of your results and screen them with your inclusion and exclusion criteria. And then your third set of searches are kind of supplementary searches. So this is where maybe you are going to look at citations and references for some of the papers that you found and pull things out of those. Maybe you will use some AI tools, discovery tools, to supplement your searches if that's something that you're familiar with or comfortable with. Perhaps you are going to look to specific organizations that you know are undertaking research in this area that isn't going to be published in academic journals because it's grey literature, but it's something that you know is important for your area of research. So we're going to have a look at all 3 of these searches, and I will demo some searching in some databases. Obviously the databases that you have available to you are going to vary depending on your institution. So I would recommend speaking to your librarian at your institution about what's available for you. So our first stage is this scoping search. And I think in terms of the searching, it's probably the part where there's the most work to do, because you really need to figure out what's happening. And I've tried to break it into kind of 7 stages that we can talk about each one in detail. So the first thing to do is to think about what is your research question and to kind of break it down into the different components of that research question. So it might be that there is a particular population that you're interested in. So in this example, I'm interested in disabled children. It might be that I'm interested in a particular intervention. In my example, that would be school exclusion. But maybe in your research area, there is a particular setting you're interested in. Perhaps you are looking for research that's taken place in schools or in hospitals or in prisons. So it's kind of thinking about those different parts of your question. Okay. The next thing we need to do, so yeah, what are we comparing? Who's our population? Are there particular interventions? But other things might be settings. That might be part of what you're thinking about as well. The next part of this is to think about the language that you're using. When we use a tool like Google Scholar, which I think a lot of people are really familiar with, it will, to a certain degree, go, yeah, you've said school exclusion, but you probably are also interested in suspension. The databases, bibliographic databases, don't necessarily do that. They may suggest search terms to you, but they won't necessarily automatically include them in your search. This can be really helpful because it's, you know, there's a reason why Google Scholar always gives you 30,000 results that you then have to sift through to find the ones that are actually relevant to you. Whereas these databases are only going to give you exactly what you've asked for. But it does mean that you need to think yourself about, what am I actually asking? What do I mean when I say school exclusion? What other language might someone have used to talk about that? Or if I'm interested in experiences, are there particular research methods that may have pulled that out of people? Does it help me to include those research methods in my search strategy if I'm interested in finding experiences? Similarly, the language around disability, there may be kind of different language that is used more popularly in different contexts, or you know, there's a term now that is more popular, whereas it wasn't the term that was being used 5 years ago. And depending on when you're, or where you're looking for that research, really thinking about what language might a researcher have used to describe this. So I think there's a couple of ways that you can find that additional language. One is to read some papers. So you probably at this stage, even if you haven't begun your lit review, you probably already started collecting papers that interest you, that are relevant to your area of research. And you can start to think about what language are people using in those papers. But also, you might decide to have a look in a thesaurus, look up experiences in a thesaurus and see what other language does it suggest, or a more up-to-date version of that. If you are familiar with using large language model, generative AI like ChatGPT or Copilot, something it's really good at is predicting language. That's kind of its whole thing. So asking it for synonyms of words or phrases that you're interested in, asking it for alternative search terms for something may provide you with additional language. And also you'll adapt this as you do your scoping searches and you find new papers. You'll be like, oh, they've used this phrase and I'm going to add that into my search. And that's what the scoping searches are about. It's about playing with the language. So you don't need to go into your scoping searches with a full list of synonyms for every part of your research question. You're going to add to that as you do your search. So yeah, as I've said, thinking about the use of language in over time and in different places is going to be really helpful. There may be different spellings, American English versus UK English, for example, and it's worth bearing in mind what that difference might be and including both versions in your search. A couple of useful tools to be aware of in your search as well. So speech marks, you use these, most databases respond to these, and it denotes a certain phrase. So you don't need to put it around an individual word, but if you're using a particular phrase and you want that exact phrase returning, then speech marks are going to tell the database, this is the exact phrase I want. Another really useful tool is truncation. So this is the shift key plus number 8 on your keyboard if you're using a QWERTY, a sort of QWERTY keyboard. And this gives you the power to search for multiple endings to a word without having to type out that list of synonyms. So for example, child with a truncation gives you articles that refer to child, children, childhood. They may throw up sometimes some of the results you're not expecting. For example, if I've worked with people doing research on childhood diabetes. And when you put child with truncation and diabetes into a search, very quickly you start to see a lot of results that are talking about like prenatal care, because of child truncated, also giving you childbirth, and then so bringing up things about like gestational diabetes. It's not a perfect tool. Experiment with it. For some of your search terms, it might actually be better to type out all of your synonyms, but often truncation will save you a lot of time doing that. The next thing we think about is how we're organizing our search. So these are operators, and basically they organize your search terms. So we're gonna have a look at doing this actually in a database in a minute. But and is where you bring together those different concepts. So in our example here, I am interested in experiences and disabled children and school exclusion. So the and will find me pieces of research where those three different things overlap with each other. And whatever language I've used to describe that, there has to be one example of each of those pieces of language in that paper for the search to return it to me. And really focuses my search. I can use as many ands as I want, but every time I add another and in, I can generally expect to see fewer results coming up. Or does the opposite. So this is how I list my synonyms. So I'm saying school exclusion, or suspension, or pupil referral unit, or alternative provision. The more ors I include, the more results I can expect to see coming back, because I'm giving the databases more language to work with. Sometimes it might be that it doesn't return any. Sometimes it might return one or two. Sometimes it might bring back thousands, and maybe it's then time to think about that phrase that word or phrase I've added and think, is that helpful? There are a couple of others as well. Not will exclude any results. So say I was interested in papers about children, I might want to say not teenagers in order to sort of exclude those ones. But I would say use it with caution, because there only has to be a passing mention of the word teenager. And maybe the paper is saying, we're interested in children, not teenagers. But because you've said not teenagers, it's excluded that paper. So use it with caution, but it's something to consider experimenting with. Most databases also have a proximity search, which is where if words have been used near each other, so they're in the same sentence perhaps, or in the same paragraph, you can tell the database, yeah, find me examples of the word school near to the word exclusion. It can be really helpful for identifying language as well. Maybe you won't use it in your final search, but it might be a way of identifying different phrasings that you haven't considered. And then now it's time for us to actually look in a database. So we're going to test out this initial search we've made in a database. And I would suggest using a fairly big one for this. There are examples of very subject-specific databases. So I'm a subject librarian for education, and one of our databases is the British Education Index. It only works with 200 journals that are published in the UK and are very specifically about education. That might be useful to me, but it doesn't have the broadest set of things to pull from. So generally speaking, to start with, I suggest starting with a big database. These are going to vary depending on your discipline and what your institution provides access to. But generally, I suggest people starting with Web of Science or Scopus. They're both really big databases. They work with like over 20,000 journals from a very broad range of disciplines, which means that when you're talking about something where maybe your research is covering several different disciplines, for example, you're interested in education, but you're also pulling things in about health or mental health, it can be really useful to look in a database that covers a broad range of disciplines. Talk to your librarian for sort of guidance on what is going to be A, available to you, and B, most useful for your subject area. So I want us to, let me just double check what the next one is. Yeah. So I want us to have a look now in an actual database. So this is Web of Science. I have already put in those synonyms just to save us a little bit of time. You'll see that I have put in my truncation. So this is going to bring me back results that say disabled or disability. It's going to capture both of those things. It's also going to bring me back special educational need and the plural of that, special educational needs. Similarly, learning difficulty or learning difficulties. So it can be really useful for hitting plurals of things as well as singulars. So each one of these list off where I've got synonyms for a particular concept. And then you'll see here is the and, joining together each one of these areas. So the results I see will have to mention something from each one of these boxes in any combination, but it has to bring back at least one piece of language from each one of these. When you are searching in databases, you get a range of fields that you can choose from. So fields in this context, they're metadata fields. So if we click on the list here, you can see what fields might be. So you could be searching in document types, or there's all kinds of options here. If you say all fields, then your results are going to include things like journal titles and author affiliations. And I think that is the thing that can most often skew the results that you're seeing, because someone may be publishing in the Journal of Special Needs, Journal of Special Educational Needs, but it's not that the particular article is not related to what you're interested in. Or maybe their job title has some language in it that reflects your search, but they're not actually publishing, that article is not actually about your topic. So I would say that if there's an option for searching the title, abstract, and keywords, that's a really good one to use. But otherwise, I would say search the abstract, because if the language that you're interested in is appearing in the abstract, it's going to be pretty relevant. Generally speaking, for a systematic review, you wouldn't be expected to search the full text. You'd be basing your search on the title or abstract. So I'm going to change each one of these so that I'm searching the title, abstract, keywords. And then let's have a little look at what's out there. So I've got 395 results for my search. That's quite a lot. It's really important to remember that with this kind of searching, I'm going to be screening these results. So in a traditional literature review, I might sort of scroll through this list and be like, well, I like the look of number 4, and I'm interested in number 8, and I'm going to just disregard the other stuff that's here. In a systematic review, I'm going to take all my results and I am going to look through the title and the abstract for each one and go, does this meet my criteria? So you really need to weigh up your capacity in terms of time with how many results you're getting. And that can be that can feel quite tricky, because obviously you want to make sure you're not missing anything. But there may be ways to remove some of the results that aren't as relevant to you. So let's just go back. Actually, no, quickly, I just want to show you a couple of features of these databases. So another difference between these databases and, say, Google Scholar would be that in Google Scholar, it displays its results based on kind of either its algorithm, or I think I can change it to time, like when it was published. But I have a lot more options for looking at my results in these databases. So maybe I want to see things that it calls most relevant. Now this database decides what is most relevant based on how many instances of my search terms show up in it. So you can see that it highlights those search terms that I've asked for, so I can see why this one is up at the top. But I could change it and say I want to see the most recent research. I want to see the highest citation counts. I have lots of different options for sorting my data. I also have a lot of different filters. So at the side here, I can decide what sort of documents do I want to include. Am I interested in including conference proceedings? Am I interested in including editorial materials? So with this database, everything comes from journals. But obviously in journals, not everything that is published in a journal is kind of research material. So maybe I want to say, actually, I'm not interested in including conference proceedings or editorial materials. So I'm going to exclude those from my results. So these are some ways that I can start to reduce down what I'm seeing in here. I also have the option to filter by time as well. So the oldest piece of research in here is from 1983, and maybe I'm not interested in that. That's going to depend on my inclusion and exclusion criteria, and we're going to talk about those a little bit more in a minute. But generally speaking, those will be dictated by my study. So maybe there was a policy change, and that's what I'm interested in seeing what's happened since then. Maybe there was already a systematic review on this topic, and I just want to see the things that have happened since then, because I'm only interested in kind of updating what we already know about this. So I can refine by time. I also have the option to refine by countries and regions. So I can add a filter in here for where the research happened. Now, it's really important to note that when we are looking at this list, it is basing it on where the lead author was from. So let's say I'm interested in research from the UK. It's annoying. It doesn't have a UK filter. And also it automatically displays the results based on who has the most hits. So I'm going to change it. I can change it to alphabetical. So make it a little bit easier for me to spot my UK countries. So let's just, I just see something's coming in the chat. I'm just gonna, right. Could I use some of the methods you've outlined to support undertaking a traditional literature review? Have you experience of using systematic literature reviews? So a traditional, when we say a systematic literature review, it's a very specific methodology, and part of what it includes is that you're working as a team. And the reason that you work as a team is because it's going to help reduce author bias. So when I am the only author choosing what papers are included in my review, there's potential for me to curate a collection which consciously or unconsciously reflects my bias. A systematic review will be undertaken by a team of people to kind of contradict that. So already when we're talking about doing a systematic searching for your lit review as a doctoral student, we're already talking about it's not a real quote unquote systematic review. You're sort of taking some of the systematic method. So by following some of these steps, you're going to get a really comprehensive literature review. But I guess it's up to you to chat with your supervisor about how far you take that. Do they think you need to go through the whole kind of screening process, or is it okay for you to kind of pick things out of that? So I hope that answers that one. Which advice for publications in other languages? We are going to talk about that. Yes, that's something we will talk about in a moment. So back to searching by country. So if we use the country filter in the database, then what we will see pretty quickly, I think, here we go. So number 4 is not actually talking about research that's happened in the UK. It's talking about research that's taken place in Zambia, Sierra Leone, Rwanda, and South Africa. So why is this coming up when I've said that I'm interested in research from the UK? if we click onto it, then we'll very quickly see, that if we scroll down, we can see that one of the authors, the corresponding author, is based at institutions in the UK. So that filter is looking at their affiliations and going, they're from the UK, you want to see this one. So we have another option for how we can find research that happened in the UK, and we could add it into our search. So I mentioned about every time I add another and into this search, it's going to reduce my number of results. The UK is particularly annoying because there are so many different ways that it might have been referred to. It might be the UK, the United Kingdom, Britain, British. These are the different language that might come up in the abstract. I do this search a lot, which is why it's auto-filled it for me. That's not kind of an auto-filling that it normally does. It's just because I do this so often. So 39 of those papers actually mention the UK in their title or abstract. So part of your scoping search is going to be playing with, does the filter, if I'm interested in a particular region, is the filter most helpful, or is the adding it into my search strategy most helpful? Okay. Another question, is there a peer-reviewed journal filter? That will depend on the database. So different databases index different materials. Web of Science only works with peer-reviewed journals, but some of the other databases, so for example, one of the other databases that I suggested on that slide was the International Bibliography of the Social Sciences, which includes publications in other languages, doesn't only work with journals. So there will be other materials in there. There are theses, there are books, there are reports from other institutions. So on those kind of databases, you will often find there is a peer-reviewed filter. Similarly, there are some databases for education, things like ERIC, the Educational Resources Information Centre, which has a peer-reviewed filter on it. Again, I would suggest speaking to your librarian about the databases that you have available and kind of what is indexed in them, and how to particularly use those ones. Hope that answers Celine's second question. Let's just go back to our slides quickly. So we've done a little quick search, and these are some things to ask yourself. How many results are you seeing? Do they feel relevant to you? Maybe you want to experiment with whether you're searching just the title or whether you're searching the abstract. Does that change how relevant the results are? Do you need to add more into your search, or actually, as in adding more ors, more synonyms, so that you can capture more results? For example, maybe if you were, I'm afraid all my examples are going to be around kind of education or social policy, because that's where I spend most of my time. But if I was searching for research on SENCO's role in something, so special educational need coordinators, but I wasn't finding very much, then maybe I want to expand that search box to include other school staff. And then in my lit review, I can say, you know, there's this research that's taking place, and they've talked to teachers and they've talked to teaching assistants, but there's very little that is talking about the role of the special educational needs coordinator. So maybe if I'm not seeing a lot of results, I need to expand the area that I'm searching and expand the language I'm using. But maybe I'm seeing too many results, and so I need to think about how I'm going to narrow that down. And we saw that when I added an additional and put in that I was interested in the UK, that took that set of search results from over 300 down to 39. And that's going to make it much more relevant, much more specific set of results, and is maybe going to be more relevant to what I'm interested in. Is there a year of publication filter? Yes. So most databases will have publication years. So you can see here that for this set of results, my oldest one was 2003. My most recent one was 2024. And most databases will give you a publication as a data publication as a filter. That's almost always an option. Oh dear, where's my slides gone? There we go. Oh dear. Hopefully they are gonna come back. Let's just look at them slightly smaller. The final point I wanted to sort of say from this slide is that it can be really helpful to know if someone else has done a review on this topic. So there is under here a filter for review article. So I could filter using that, but also I could add it into my search quickly. So usually a systematic review or any kind of review will say in the title that it's a review, or maybe it will call itself a meta-analysis. So what I'm saying now is, out of those 36 results, just show me ones that mention review or meta-analysis. And I can see here that I have got a systematic review of stakeholder experiences, attitudes, and perspectives. This one is particular to classrooms in African countries. So maybe that is not one that is useful to me, but maybe, let's just go down a little bit further. Maybe this one about peers promoting social inclusion, maybe that would be interesting to me. So it can be helpful to know, did someone else do a review on this? And that will then feed into my inclusion exclusion, because if someone did a review already on my topic, then I might want to say, this review happened in 2018. They found this. That would be part of my background introduction. So now I'm only interested in papers that have been published since 2018, because I want to know what's changed since that last systematic review was published. So it can be helpful to have a look at other systematic reviews. Also, have a look at, they'll describe in their methodology what search terms they used. So have a look at that. That can be really useful too. So we asked about other language. For various reasons, like systemic racism, although databases are trying to be more globally inclusive, you might find that whatever topic you're searching in these big databases, if we look at those countries that things are coming from, nearly always the top four producers of this research are nearly always going to be in the UK, the US, Australia, China, Canada is in the top 4 for this one. But yeah, we're usually going to see that it's kind of dominated by particular countries. So if you are interested if your research is meant to offer a global perspective on a question, or if you're interested in a particular region, you might need to search beyond just those kind of big databases to find that. This is a list of databases that the team that I work for, is kind of our active list. And you will see that we've set up a list of databases and platforms by geographical area. So loads of things that help you find resources published in Africa, published less for Europe, on the Indian subcontinent, in East Asia, in Southeast Asia, Latin America, and then things that are aiming to be very global as well. So that list is publicly available. I don't think you have to just be in the University of Bristol to access that. And you might find that helpful. But again, talk to your librarian about what databases are going to help you with a region that you're particularly interested in. I did also mention the International Bibliography of the Social Sciences. So if I just very quickly go to, very quickly go to one of my subject guides, because I can't remember the exact terms. Here we go. So the International Bibliography of the Social Sciences covers international material and incorporates over 100 different languages in there. So that can be a really useful one. And then also a lot of those geographic specific ones will allow searching in lots of languages too. So yeah, hopefully that will kind of help with the question of languages and also global coverage. So Celine, PhD thesis, which databases would you recommend for searching unpublished PhD thesis? So previously I would have recommended Ethos, which is the British Library. Unfortunately, the British Library had a cyber attack, which they're still kind of working out how to recover from. And Ethos is one of the services that is not yet up and running. Really hope it's going to be back soon. Here at the university, we have access to ProQuest ProQuest. Hang on, let me show you. Here we go. Theses and dissertations. So there's the Networked Digital Library of Theses and Dissertations. There is PQDT Open, which is open access dissertations and thesis, and then PQDT Global, which is dissertations and thesis from all around the world. So there are different, and also some databases will have thesis indexed in them as well. Sort of depends on the subject area. So hopefully that will help. Again, speak to your librarian. If I'm your librarian, please feel free to get in touch. So during our scoping searches, we're going to come across things that maybe have different language. We can add those into our searches. We're going to refine our search. We're going to develop it. Then we're going to test it out in some other databases. So you want to demonstrate whether you're doing a systematic method review or whether you're doing a traditional literature review, you're going to want to demonstrate that you have done a really comprehensive search. Okay, so I would suggest testing it out in some other databases. So I mentioned Scopus, I mentioned the International Bibliography of the Social Sciences. There will also be some databases that are really specific to your area of research. So for example, in the School of Education, we have access to a lot of education-specific databases, and it would be worth experimenting with the search in there. I'm just very quickly going to show Eric. This is it. So this is one I mentioned, which doesn't just have journal articles in. So you can see that one of my options, even as I'm building my search, is to say, just show me the things that are peer reviewed. Okay. So databases that don't just work with journals will often have that. Got a question about screening phases. I might come back to that in a moment. Okay. Looking at the time, so I'm going to crack on. So you can test your search. If you've already got an article that you're like, this is one that I definitely want to include, check whether it's indexed in the database just by searching for the title of the paper in that database, and then try including it in your search. So for example, say there is a paper that I'm really interested in, and the title includes, what's this one below? The title includes this phrase. So I'm going to say, all right, out of these results that you've identified, is there one with this title? Oh, look, yes, there is. Brilliant. My search works. If that one hadn't come up, I would want to go back to that article that I know I want to include and ask myself, what's missing from my search? What language is not being picked up? So this is how you can kind of test your search for robustness. And then also try it out in some other databases to decide which database is going to be most useful to me and which database is going to, which databases aren't that useful. So again, stage 7 would be testing out in some other databases. So I don't know why none of my slides are working properly. This is really upsetting. Might be because I'm using the online version of PowerPoint to present. Here we go. It's not usually such a problem. So by the end of our scoping searches, we've done that. We've played around in databases. We will know what are the search terms I'm using. That's your search strategy. So your collections of ands and ors, that makes up your search strategy. You're going to know which databases you'll use, and you're going to have an idea of what inclusion and exclusion criteria you'll need. There is no such thing as a perfect search. So whatever search terms you're using, you will be bringing back results that are irrelevant to you. Also, you're going to be balancing between having narrow enough terms that you're not overwhelming yourself with how much you have to sift through, and broad enough terms that you are sure you've captured as much of the relevant research as you can. And at some point you have to decide, you know what, this search, this set of results is good enough. I'm happy with what I'm seeing. I feel like I've got enough here to papers that I can see are relevant, that I'm going to have enough to write about. My other tip would be keep a little record. So you can do this in any way that suits you. Maybe you want to keep notes in a notebook. Maybe you want to keep notes in a Word document. Maybe you want to use a little spreadsheet. Maybe you take screenshots of your searches, whatever works for you. But this is going to kind of help you to avoid duplicating your work when you step away from your searching to go and make tea, or maybe have the weekend off or do something else. And then you come and you sit back down, you're like, oh, I can't remember where I'd got to. I can't remember which databases I searched in and what search terms I was using. Keep a little record. No one else is going to see it, but it's going to help you to kind of keep your sanity during this scoping searches stage. So then we move on to our systematic search. So we know our search terms, we know our chosen databases. We're going to export all the results from each database. So there is always an option to export results. Some databases make it clearer than others. How you export them, what kind of file type you're exporting, will depend on how you're going to screen your results, and we'll come back to that in a moment. But yeah, there's always an option to export your results. So you are going to export all of your results from your search. And different databases, it's slightly different. So again, your subject librarian will be able to help if you're struggling with a particular database and how to export your results. You're then going to import all of your results into your database, from all of your databases, into whatever method you are using to screen. We're going to come back to this stage in a minute. It's important to note how many results totally are you importing. Okay, so of all of your database searches, how many things did you find? Stage 4 is going to be getting rid of your duplicates. There will be some papers that have shown up in more than one database. Maybe there's a single paper that has shown up in all of your databases. So your first stage is to get rid of the duplicates. And again, keep track of how many duplicates you're deleting. And then stage 5 is looking at your screening your results. Okay, so we will have a little look at exclusion and screening in a moment. Okay, Some stuff you're excluding because it doesn't meet your criteria. You might still think it's a good paper. You could still include it in your introduction or your background section. Just because it hasn't met the criteria for your actual lit review, it doesn't mean that on other sections of your thesis that you're like, that paper's useful. So it might still be worth keeping hold of some of them, but not for your actual lit review. Some of your results, you'll just look at the title and be like, that is not relevant. And some of them you will need to read the abstract. And there might be the occasional one that you're like, I need to go and have a look at the methods to see whether this meets what I'm interested in or not. But do those quick ones first. Get rid of the quick ones and then maybe make a little maybe pile and deal with those ones that are going to be a more detailed inquiry later. So how will you manage your results? And hopefully this is going to answer Nora's question. Again, it's about finding a method that works for you. So these are the 3 that I generally suggest. Most databases will allow you to export your results as a spreadsheet. You could create a column for any part of it that you're interested in. You could color code stuff. It has a deduplication feature. If you are working with like, you know, maybe 100 results, spreadsheets can quite quickly become unwieldy, particularly if you've got a field where you're including the abstract. That's a lot of data to have in a spreadsheet. It could very quickly get to the point where you're scrolling through it and the screen jumps around and it gets frustrating. But if that's a method that you're happy with, that you're familiar with and you're comfortable with, then that is perfectly acceptable. We have citation management tools. So maybe you already use a citation management tool. If not, Carrie-Anne's going to be talking about that in 2 weeks. But things like EndNote, Mendeley's, or Tero, they have duplicate tools in them. You can put things into folders. You can say, you know, this is my included folder, this is my excluded folder. You can use it to manage those results you've exported from your databases. There are also systematic review tools. The University of Bristol doesn't subscribe to any, but I've played with Rayan a little bit. It has a free level of access, and it will help you with deduplicating your results. You can then label your results as to why you included or excluded them, which is going to help with your reporting at the end. I have put some tips for using Rayan on one of my library guides, which again is publicly available. So even if you're not with UOB, you can go and have a look at this. Your institution may subscribe to a systematic review tool. There's another one called Covidence as well. So it might be that your institution has a tool that there's an institutional subscription to. The free level of Rayan does not, as far as I'm aware, the free level doesn't have anything that supports with the full text phase. But I believe that if you pay for access, there is support for the full text phase. But I've only ever played with the free level and used it for the initial screening. So I can't actually answer specifically about whether it supports with that. Yeah, apologies. I know there is a lot of work being done around AI tools to support with screening processes for systematic reviews, but at this stage, I don't know of any that I recommend. Okay, I hope that has covered that one for you. But again, speak to your librarian, they might have other suggestions. Inclusion exclusion criteria. So these are very much dependent upon your research question. They may include things like a date. Maybe you have a cutoff date. You're only interested in things that happened before this date or after this date. There needs to be a reason for your inclusion exclusion criteria. So maybe that date is because of a change in a policy. Maybe that date is because of a change in a legal status, a particular type of care that was brought out. Maybe it was a result of a change in education. Maybe there has already been a systematic review and you just want to know what has happened since that last systematic review. Other examples of inclusion exclusion criteria might be the setting. So maybe if you are doing something around offending or like offenders. Maybe you're only interested in what is happening after they've left prison. Or maybe you're only interested in what's happening in the prison. So maybe the setting, maybe there is something around inpatient or outpatient. Your inclusion and exclusion criteria will be defined by your research topic. And when you've done your screening process and your scoping searches, and you're seeing the kind of results that are coming up, it's going to give you an idea of like, okay, I can't get rid of these results via my search strategy. They're going to be part of what's coming through. So what inclusion and exclusion criteria do I need in order to filter these out for my final review? Conscious that we've only got 5 minutes left. You are going to include a Prisma flow diagram that reflects your screening process. So you can see here, this is a very simple mock-up one, but I identified this many records from a database. This many were duplicates that I removed. I also used some automation tools, so maybe to get rid of things from a certain date. So 70 results came to my screening process and I excluded 55 of them. Really, I should probably include reasons why I excluded these. So making sure that when you're doing your screening process, whatever method you're using, you're noting, I excluded this one because it's the wrong setting, it's the wrong population, it's the wrong type of study. And I also have the option to include studies that I found by other methods. So this is where we talk about supplementary searches. So this is kind of after you've done your database searching, you might want to do some other things. There might be papers in reference lists or that have cited a paper that you've already identified and you want to include that. Maybe there is a specific journal that you want to search in. We call these hand searching, which is a bit of an old-fashioned term and refers to when you would have come into the library and actually searched by hand through journals. The more up-to-date version of that would be AI discovery tools. Maybe you already use these, maybe you're already comfortable with them. You can't use them for the systematic part of your search, but you could include them as a supplementary search and see if they bring back any results that weren't in your original searching. And then we've got those things like organizational websites. So there may be charities or think tanks working in your area. So if we think again about the setting of prisons, there are people like the Prison Reform Trust who produce research. Is there research from them that you want to include? This is your opportunity. And you would note those on your Prisma flow diagram over here, and they would then be included in the total studies that you are putting into your review. So that's your third stage, supplementary searches. And again, that's going to be very much dictated by your area of research and the tools that you want to use. Couple of tips for making accessing papers easier. At the University of Bristol, we subscribe to a thing called LibKey Nomad, which means that if I come across a paper through some other method that isn't part of my university subscriptions, it will tell me whether I've got a copy in the University of Bristol library. Similarly, there is a browser extension called Unpaywall, which links to open access of versions of articles. So if someone has published something and they've put a copy into their institutional repository, and I don't have access to the journal it was published in, I can find it in their institutional repository. So I'll just really quickly show you. Let me just go. This one is one I have access to, but I just want to show you how these add-ons work. So this is the one that finds it through the University of Bristol for me. Your institution may or may not have this tool, but if I click on that, then it takes me through the library catalogue to find me the PDF of the paper. This little padlock over here is the open access tool. So anyone can use this. This is Unpaywall. And so you can see it's not intrusive. It only shows up when it detects a journal article, i.e. something with a DOI. And if I click on that one, it takes me back to this page because this is actually an open access thing. But were it that there were a version in Laura Mullen's London South Bank University repository, it would take me to that version instead. So they're just kind of useful to have, making things more accessible to you. So I just wanted to flag up that those exist. So we have got 1 minute left. I think there are some things in the chat. So let me just bring the chat back up. I think because I'm sharing my screen, I can't actually, there we go. Let's have a little look at what's in the chat. I do appreciate people might need to go. Is there a maximum or minimum number of articles that should be included in a systematic literature review for a doctoral thesis? No, it really depends on the topic that you are looking at. And I would definitely talk to your supervisor, do some searching, see what's out there, get an idea of maybe, you don't need an exact number, but get an idea of, is there much on this topic? And go and talk to your supervisor. It might be that your lit review needs to be on a slightly broader version of your topic so that you can demonstrate that there is a gap. So like I said about the, there's nothing on SENCOs, but there's stuff on teachers. So maybe my lit review is on school staff in general. And then I say, there's a gap here. I'm interested in SENCOs. That's what my research is going to fill. Hope that answers that question. Yes. Oh, brilliant. That's already been answered. Thank you, Rosie. Got to go. Lovely. Do you have 2 minutes? Brilliant. Okay. I don't think there's any more questions in here. I don't think Bath provide unpaywall. Unpaywall is open access. LibKey Nomad is the one that we as an institution provide, but unpaywall is free. Anyone can have it. It's supporting free open research. So yeah, unpaywall, anyone can have. Hope that Rose got that. Okay, I think that's everything. Thank you for coming. There were a lot more of you than I expected. But yeah, thank you very much.